Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today we're talking about the cul-de-sac. Now, if you're currently house hunting, or even if you've just driven through a neighborhood recently, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's that street that leads to nowhere, the dead end. But is it just a dead end, or is it a destination? I have a document in front of me today that breaks down the anatomy of the cul-de-sac. But we aren't just going to read it. We're going to dissect it. We're going to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of living at the bottom of the sack. Because, believe it or not, that is exactly what the word means. As our source notes, the direct translation of the French term cul-de-sac is literally the bottom of the sack. It's a vivid image, isn't it? Being at the bottom of the sack implies being gathered together, enclosed, perhaps a bit hidden. And that brings us to the fundamental definition. A cul-de-sac is a road connected to the outside world at only one end, while the other end is closed off. But it's not just a street that stops abruptly. Unlike a standard dead end that might just hit a wall, a true residential cul-de-sac usually finishes with a rounded, semicircular bulb. This design choice creates a very specific type of environment, a secluded residential pocket. But the question remains, what are the pros and cons of living in such a place? Let's break it down. Part 1. The sanctuary effect, the pros. Let's start with the positives. Why do people pay a premium to live in these circles? The document I'm reviewing highlights 3 major advantages: traffic, community, and land usage. First, let's talk about the cars. Or rather, the lack of them. If you live on a through street, you are subject to the whims of the city. You have commuters, delivery trucks, school buses, and the dreaded rat runners, people cutting through a neighborhood to avoid traffic lights. But in a cul-de-sac, the traffic volume is incredibly low. Our source categorizes the vehicles entering a cul-de-sac into 3 very specific groups. Group A, the residents living there. Group B, visitors coming to see those residents. And Group C, drivers who have made a mistake and are lost. That's it. There is no Group D. There is no passing through. And frankly, even Group B and C are rare. The vast majority of the time, the only metal moving on the asphalt belongs to the people who live in those single-digit or low double-digit number of houses. This leads directly into the biggest selling point for young families: safety. Because the vehicle count is so low and the speeds are naturally restricted by the short length of the road, it is a haven for families with children and pets. You often hear about the street hockey test. Can kids play street hockey or ride bikes out front without a parent having a heart attack every 30 seconds? In a cul-de-sac, the answer is usually yes. The environment is inherently safer. And it's not just physical safety from cars. There is a security aspect to this isolation. Because there is less outside interference and zero through traffic, the general security tends to be better. A strange car stands out immediately. You know your neighbor's sedan. You know the delivery van. If a random car is idling at the curb, everyone notices. It's a natural neighborhood watch system. Speaking of turning around, there's a misconception that dead ends are traps for cars. But as the text points out, a properly designed cul-de-sac isn't hard to navigate. You just drive to the end, use that semicircular bulb to slowly loop around, and you drive right out. It's actually quite civilized. Now, let's move from the street to the people. The community. This is where the psychology of the cul-de-sac gets interesting. The document notes that because there are usually fewer than a dozen families in this enclosed loop, people get familiar with one another very quickly. You aren't just a house number, you're a face. This closed environment fosters trust. It's simpler to form relationships when you aren't shouting over the noise of passing traffic. It creates a village within a city vibe. You are physically oriented towards each other. When you walk out your front door, you aren't looking down an infinite road. You're looking at your neighbors. This can lead to that idyllic suburban lifestyle, borrowing sugar, watching each other's houses when on vacation, and that deep sense of belonging. But perhaps the most tangible financial benefit lies in the dirt itself. The land. If you look at a plat map, that's the bird's eye view of the property lines. Cul-de-sac lots look like slices of pizza. The source describes this perfectly. They have a narrow front face and a wide back face. Because the street curves, the front of the property is pinched. But as you go back, the property lines flare out. This means the backyard is often significantly larger than what you find on a standard grid lot. This opens up a world of design possibilities. If you're a fan of outdoor living, this is your canvas. The text suggests that if you utilize this space well, you can create something truly beautiful. Because the backyard is wider, it feels more private than the front yard. It's the perfect spot for a large pergola, a sprawling garden, or even a swimming pool. Imagine that, a massive, pie-shaped backyard where you can fit a pool and still have room for the dog to run, all hidden away from the narrow street front. It sounds like paradise, doesn't it? Wouldn't that be beautiful? The text asks. However, Part 2, the fishbowl effect, the cons. Every silver lining has a cloud, and the cul-de-sac is no exception. For every buyer who sees a sanctuary, there is another who sees a cage. Let's look at the downsides mentioned in our source, because they're significant and can be deal breakers. The first issue is the flip side of that pizza slice lot shape. Curb appeal. In real estate, we talk about the grand entrance. We want a wide facade that looks impressive from a street. But because of the geometry we just discussed, narrow front, wide back, the house's frontage is often squeezed. Compared to a square lot on a straight street, a cul-de-sac house might look a bit smaller or more cramped from the sidewalk. It lacks that broad, imposing presence. And that narrow frontage leads to a very practical headache. Parking. This is a point people often forget until they host their Thanksgiving dinner. The source highlights that because the front yard is narrow and the street is curved, street parking is a massive problem. Think about the geometry. On a straight road, you can park cars bumper to bumper in a straight line. On a tight curve, you lose space. Plus, you have the driveways radiating out from the center like spokes on a wheel. Between the driveways and the curve, there is very little curb left. If you don't park in your driveway or garage, finding a spot right in front of your house can be a challenge. And when you have a party, good luck. Your guests might be parking streets away. Next, let's talk about the land again. Irregularity. While some people love the huge backyard, others hate the shape. The source notes that the land is irregular. It's not a perfect square or rectangle. For some buyers who crave symmetry or have very specific building plans, a non-square lot is a negative. This irregularity bleeds into another issue, renovation and expansion. Let's say you buy the house, and 5 years later, you want to build an addition. Maybe a new wing for the in-laws or a garage extension. The text warns that the space for additions and alterations can be limited. Why? Because of zoning and setbacks. Cities require your house to be a certain distance from the property line. On a pie-shaped lot with converging property lines, those setbacks can crisscross in ways that severely limit where you can pour concrete. The land is already planned out tightly, and fitting a square addition onto a triangular piece of available land is an architectural nightmare. But the biggest downside, the one that keeps people up at night, it's the social risk. We talked earlier about the trust and the village. But what happens when the village idiot moves in next door? The document raises a crucial point. If you encounter a neighbor you dislike, it is very hard to avoid them. On a through street, you can look straight ahead and drive past. In a cul-de-sac, you are facing them. You share a driveway, aprons sometimes. You share the bulb. If your neighbor throws loud parties late at night, argues constantly, or parks their RV in a way that blocks your view, you are stuck. There is nowhere to hide. The text specifically mentions the difficulty of dodging neighbors you hate. In a standard grid, you have anonymity. In a cul-de-sac, you are in a fishbowl. If the dynamic is toxic, it is intensely toxic because of that proximity. Part 3, the synthesis and strategy. So, we have a list of compelling pros and a list of frustrating cons. The source poses the ultimate question, should you buy or should you not? The author admits that this is a highly subjective question. There is no scientific formula that says cul-de-sac equals happiness. It depends entirely on your lifestyle, your patience, and your luck. However, the text does offer a final verdict, a guiding principle, if you will, and it all comes down to the people. The conclusion is, if your neighbors are nice, the benefits actually outweigh the downsides. This is a profound insight. The physical constraints, the parking, the narrow frontage, the irregular lot, those are manageable. They are static. You can learn to park differently. You can landscape the weirdly shaped yard. But the human element is the variable that tips the scale. If the social contract holds, if the neighbors are respectful and the kids play nice, the safety, the quiet, and the privacy of that big backyard make the cul-de-sac the superior choice. Part 4. The expand analysis, going deeper. Now that we've covered the core arguments from our source, I want to expand on this a bit further. I want to give you, the listener, a toolkit for evaluating a cul-de-sac house if you're seeing one this weekend. We need to look beyond the text and into the reality of living this lifestyle. 1. The Sunday morning versus Saturday night test. Since the source emphasizes the neighbor factor so heavily, how do you vet them before you buy? You can't just knock on doors and ask, "Are you annoying?" I recommend the time shift strategy. Drive into the cul-de-sac on a Saturday night. Is it a parking lot of guests? Is there loud music? This addresses the party concern mentioned in the text. Then, go back on a Sunday morning. Is it quiet? Are people out washing cars? The source mentions that entrance is limited to residents mostly, which means you can spot the vibe instantly. If there are basketball hoops in the street, you know it's a family zone. If there are pristine lawns and no movement, it's likely an older demographic. 2. The snow and service factor. The text mentions the 3 types of cars, but it omits one crucial large vehicle, the garbage truck and the snow plow if you live in a cold climate. The bulb at the end is designed for turning. But have you ever seen a snow plow try to clear a cul-de-sac? It's an art form, and often they leave a giant pile of snow right in the middle or blocking the driveways because there is nowhere else to push it. And because parking is already tight, trash day can be an obstacle course. When you look at that narrow frontage, imagine where 3 garbage bins go. 3. The resale value proposition. The text notes that some buyers dislike the irregular land. This is true, but generally speaking, in the broader real estate market, cul-de-sac homes often command a higher price per square foot than equivalent homes on busy streets. Why? Because of that scarcity. There are fewer of them. However, the curb appeal issue is real. When you go to sell, your hero shot of the front of the house might look less impressive on Zillow or Rightmove than a wide colonial on a main road. You have to sell the lifestyle in the backyard, not just the front facade. 4. The fire safety nuance. We talked about safety regarding crime and traffic, but there is a safety trade-off regarding emergency access. While the bulb allows turning, if people are parking indiscriminately or badly, as the text warns, a fire truck might struggle to get in. In a tight cul-de-sac, bad parking isn't just an annoyance, it's a hazard. This reinforces why the neighbor relationship is so critical. You need neighbors who care enough to park considerately. 5. The privacy paradox. The text mentions the backyard is more private. This is generally true from the street view. But remember the pie shape. Your backyard gets wider, but so does your neighbors. In many cul-de-sacs, the backyards all converge at a central point. You might have 5 or 6 backyards touching yours. So, while the street is quiet, your backyard might be acoustically connected to 5 other families. If the neighbor on the left is grilling, and the neighbor on the right is swimming, and the neighbor behind you is mowing the lawn, you are in the center of a surround sound amphitheater. This reinforces the source's conclusion. You really need to like your neighbors. Conclusion, the final verdict. So what does this leave us? The cul-de-sac is a polarizing feature of modern living. It is a design that forces interaction while promising seclusion. On one hand, you have the dead-end definition, a place where the road stops. On the other hand, you have the sanctuary, a place where the noise stops. If you value a massive backyard for your pool and pergola, and you want your kids to ride their bikes without fear of speeding taxis, it is the gold standard. But you have to accept the trade-offs. You have to accept that your house might look a bit squeezed from the front. You have to accept that holiday parking will be a game of Tetris. And most importantly, you have to accept that you're entering a marriage of sorts with the other families in that circle. As our source document so wisely put it, if you can navigate the bad neighbor risk, the benefits are overwhelming. My advice? If you find a house in a cul-de-sac that you love, don't look at the house first. Look at the driveway next door. Look at the condition of the basketball hoop across the street. Because in a cul-de-sac, You aren't just buying a property. You are buying membership into a very small, very exclusive club. And you want to make sure the other members are people you want to spend the next 10 years with. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the architecture of suburbia, and I'll see you next time.